For 28 years, he had no name. No face on a wanted poster, no cell, no handcuffs. He was simply out there, living among the people of Federal Way, Washington, riding the same buses, breathing the same cold air, while a family waited for answers that refused to come. Then, 2 cigarette butts on a sidewalk outside a laundromat in Kent changed everything. This is the story of 16-year-old Sarah Yarborough, a girl who lived by 2 words, carpe diem, seize the day, and the cold case that took 32 years, a trail of DNA stretching back 4 centuries, and a community that never stopped fighting to finally crack wide open. Like this video right now. Share it with someone who needs to hear this story, and subscribe to Crime Vault Files, because justice has no expiration date. It was Saturday, December 14th, 1991. Sarah Yarborough woke up inside her family home in Federal Way, Washington, convinced she had overslept. Her drill team had a competition that morning. They were boarding a bus at Federal Way High School, heading to Juanita High School in Kirkland for the event. Sarah believed she had missed the call time. She threw on her drill team uniform. She left the hot rollers in her hair. She grabbed a large container of orange juice, said a quick goodbye to the friend who had stayed the night, and rushed out the door to her father's car. She drove less than a mile to Federal Way High School and pulled into the rear parking lot just after 8 in the morning. She was 55 minutes early. The lot was nearly empty. The school grounds were silent. Ice had formed in the puddles overnight. The temperature was brutal, the kind of cold that makes the air hurt. Sarah sat alone in the car with the orange juice resting on the passenger seat. And somewhere on those grounds, already concealed in the thick bushes near an old dugout at the edge of the campus, someone was watching. Before we go any further, you need to understand who Sarah really was, because she was not just a case number, she was not just a headline. Era Louise Yarborough was born on June 12, 1975 in Portland, Oregon. She moved to Federal Way with her family when she was 8 years old. By high school, she had become the kind of person people gravitated toward, not because she demanded the room, but because she gave everything she had to the people in it. She had bright red hair you could not miss. Her mother, Laura Yarborough, said her smile lit up every room she walked into. She was an honors student at Federal Way High School, passionate about mathematics, science, art, and reading. She danced. She was active in the youth group at Bible Baptist Church in Federal Way. She performed with a group called the Safety Kids, a youth troupe that toured the country encouraging young people to make healthy choices. That group took her all the way to New Zealand when she was just 15 years old. She told her mother she wanted to attend college somewhere far from home. She had 2 dreams pulling at her: become a museum curator or an engineer like her father. Her mother quietly hoped for the museum. Sarah lived by 2 words she carried into every single day of her life. Carpe diem, seize the day, not as a slogan, as a belief. Every single day she meant it. And that is what makes what was done to her that December morning so completely unbearable, because the person hiding in those bushes was about to steal every day she had left. Just a few blocks from Federal Way High School, 13-year-old Drew Miller and his friend had spent Friday night the way boys that age do, stayed up late, talked, and eventually fell asleep. Saturday morning, they decided to go skateboarding. There was an Albertsons grocery store nearby with a good parking lot for skating. To get there, they took the shortcut they had used dozens of times before, hopped the fence at the edge of the Federal Way High School campus, and cut straight through the school grounds. The morning air was brutal. Puddles had frozen solid overnight. The boys stomped the ice as they walked, cracking it under their shoes, laughing at the sound. 2 kids on a Saturday morning without a care in the world. Then Drew looked up. A man stepped out of the bushes ahead of them, maybe 30 or 40 yards away. He rose from the low area near an old dugout on the school grounds, surrounded by vegetation tall enough to hide a person, completely. He stood upright, looked directly at the two boys, said nothing, then turned and began walking in the same direction they were heading. Something in Drew's gut twisted. He told himself the man had probably just been smoking where no one could see him. He kept walking. He kept watching. When the boys reached the spot near the dugout, they saw her. A young woman was lying motionless in the dirt. She was not moving. She was gone. Drew looked back up. The man had stopped. He had turned around, and he was staring straight at the two boys, a long, deliberate, silent look that told them he knew exactly what they had just found. Drew Miller would later call him the boogeyman, not from a nightmare, not from a movie. Standing right there in the cold December light, real. The boys ran. They sprinted back to Drew's house on the street just down the road from the school. Drew's mother saw their faces and immediately called 911. Drew's stepfather rushed back to the campus with Drew. There was nothing anyone could do. Police arrived within minutes. When they checked the identification on the clothing near the body, they found her name. The girl in the dirt behind Federal Way High School was Sarah Yarborough, the same girl who had rushed out of her front door an hour earlier with hot rollers in her hair, convinced she was late. Her father's car sat 300 feet away in the rear parking lot. The orange juice was untouched on the passenger seat. The engine had long gone cold. There was no sign of a struggle anywhere near the car. No broken glass. No torn fabric. No marks on the ground. Sarah had not been dragged. She had walked 100 yards from the safety of her vehicle to the place where she was attacked. Sarah Yarborough had been beaten and strangled with her own nylon stockings. Her clothing was found near her body. A jogger who had been running near the tennis courts on the campus that morning had seen a girl lying motionless on the ground and a man kneeling over her. He assumed they were a couple. He kept running. By the time he understood what he had witnessed, it was far too late. When the King County Sheriff's Office processed the scene, the evidence was devastating and critical. DNA was recovered from items of Sarah's clothing. And then investigators found something else. DNA underneath Sarah's fingernails. It matched. Sarah Yarborough had scratched her attacker. She had fought with everything a 16-year-old girl had in her. And in doing so, she had left a piece of him behind. A complete male DNA profile that would sit in evidence storage for nearly 3 decades, waiting for science to be ready. Drew Miller, his friend, and the jogger all gave descriptions to the King County Sheriff's Office. A composite sketch was produced and released across a federal way immediately. A white male, around 6 feet tall, medium build, with rough and uneven skin on his face, like acne scarring or visible marks. Both boys were confident in it. More than 4,000 tips poured in from the community of Federal Way. Not one of them named Patrick Nicholas. What the people of Federal Way did not know, what they would not learn for nearly 3 decades, was that the man responsible for Sarah's death should not have been free on the morning of December 14, 1991. He should have been behind bars. 8 years earlier, in June of 1983, a 21-year-old woman named Ann Croney had driven to a park by the riverfront along the Columbia River in Richland, Washington. She leaned against the hood of her car and watched the water. A young man approached her. He was 19 years old, friendly, easy in conversation. He said his name was Pat. He mentioned he had just moved to the area. They talked casually for a few minutes, nothing alarming, nothing threatening. Then Anne noticed his voice change. Something beneath the surface shifted. She told him she had to leave. She turned toward her car. She reached for the door. That is when she felt a knife at her throat. He ordered her to undress. He walked her away from the car, down toward the riverbank, away from the road, away from anyone who could help. They were halfway to the water when one detail from their conversation just minutes earlier surfaced in Anne's mind. He had told her he could not swim. Anne Croney ran. She sprinted toward the Columbia River and dove in. She swam as hard as she could. He stood on the bank and did not follow. People at a nearby dock pulled her out. Police were called. Patrick Leon Nicholas was identified and arrested within hours. In the interrogation room, Nicholas said something that investigators would never forget. He said he recognized that he had dangerous impulses toward young women. He said he knew his intent that day had been serious. He said he knew it was wrong. He knew exactly what he was, and he said it out loud. At sentencing, Anne Croney stood before the judge and asked for the maximum penalty. The judge agreed. Patrick Nicholas received 10 years in prison for attempted rape in the first degree. Anne walked out of that courtroom believing justice had been done. She thought he would serve every day of that decade. He served 3.5 years. A prison evaluation described Nicholas as someone who would be, these are the actual words written on the document, safe to be at large. In 1987, Patrick Nicholas was released on parole, placed into an outpatient program, and disappeared from the system entirely. No one tracked him. No one monitored him. Anne Croney had no idea he was free. If Nicholas had served every day of his 10-year sentence, he would not have walked out until 1993, 2 full years after Sarah Yarborough was murdered. He would have been sitting in a prison cell on the morning of December 14, 1991, instead of crouching in the bushes of a school campus in Federal Way. The system released him early, and Sarah Yarborough paid for that decision with her life. 20 years passed with no arrest. The sketch remained on walls across Federal Way. The DNA profile sat in evidence. The King County Sheriff's Office submitted it to CODIS, the national DNA database, again and again as technology improved. Every time, the result came back the same. No match. In 2011, King County Sheriff's Detective Jim Allen made a phone call that would quietly change the history of criminal investigation. He reached out to Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick of Identifinders International, a researcher using consumer ancestry DNA databases to generate investigative leads in unsolved cases. The field was so new it barely had a name. Forensic genetic genealogy existed at the margins of law enforcement, and most agencies wanted nothing to do with it. Detective Kathleen Decker and the King County Sheriff's Office had been working Sarah's case for 2 decades. They said yes. Fitzpatrick compared the crime scene DNA against profiles in public genealogy databases, focusing on the Y chromosome, passed from father to son across generations, virtually unchanged. She found a match, not to the killer himself, but to a family bloodline. The Y chromosome traced back to a man named Robert Fuller, who had lived in Salem, Massachusetts in the 1630s. A family that had arrived in North America on the Mayflower. For the first time in history, a cold case had generated investigative leads using consumer DNA databases. Sarah Yarborough's case was making forensic history. The name Fuller immediately meant something to investigators. Bill Fuller was a longtime family friend of the Yarboroughs, the man who had organized the construction of Sarah's memorial bench on the grounds of Federal Way High School, inscribed with the words Carpe Diem. When detectives asked Bill Fuller to provide a DNA sample voluntarily, he did not hesitate. He walked in and gave it without question. His DNA was not a match to the crime scene. Bill Fuller had no involvement in Sarah's death, but his Y chromosome matched the same ancestral line. He and Sarah's killer were distant paternal cousins, both descendants of Robert Fuller from the 1600s, connected by a bloodline 4 centuries old. The killer was hiding somewhere in those branches. The team kept searching. In 2018, the arrest of the Golden State Killer using the same forensic genealogy method proved to the world that this science worked. Detective Decker contracted with Dr. Fitzpatrick again, with sharper tools and a much larger database. In September of 2019, the breakthrough came. Fitzpatrick's team identified two brothers, Edward Nicholas and Patrick Nicholas. Both were descendants of Robert Fuller, but their surname was Nicholas, not Fuller, because their grandfather had been adopted generations earlier, burying the DNA connection behind a legal name change that had happened before anyone now alive was born. That is why no search had ever found them. The killer's name did not match his bloodline. Edward Nicholas was already in CODIS. His DNA was tested immediately. It was not a match. That left one person, Patrick Leon Nicholas. Patrick Nicholas had 5 known prior sexual offenses on his record. His DNA had never been entered into any criminal database. 3 separate times the system had failed to collect it. 3 chances to stop him. 3 chances missed. Detectives built a quiet picture of who Patrick Nicholas had become. He was 55 years old. He lived alone in a rundown building on a large property in Covington, Washington. No working electricity, no visitors, almost no ties to anyone. He worked at an auto parts store. He rode the bus everywhere he went. That bus route passed directly by Federal Way High School. In 1991, Nicholas had been 27 years old, living 6 miles from the campus, riding that same route. He had been there. He had known that school. And for 28 years, not one of the 4,000 tips submitted to the King County Sheriff's Office had ever included his name. Detectives placed him under silent, invisible surveillance. They needed one discarded item with his DNA. One moment of carelessness from a man who had evaded detection for nearly 3 decades. On the weekend of September 28th and 29th, 2019, an undercover team followed Nicholas to a laundromat near a strip mall in Kent, Washington. He stepped outside. He smoked 2 cigarettes. He dropped both butts on the sidewalk. A paper napkin fell from his pocket to the ground beside them. He did not pick any of it up. He walked back inside. Detectives moved in immediately. They collected both cigarette butts and the napkin, bagged them, and rushed them to the Washington State Patrol Crime Laboratory. On Wednesday, October 2nd, 2019, the crime lab called. The DNA on those cigarette butts matched the DNA recovered from Sarah Yarborough's clothing in 1991. A perfect match. The odds of it belonging to anyone other than Patrick Nicholas, 1 in 120 quadrillion. That same evening, undercover detectives walked into Nashville's Bar and Grill in downtown Kent, identified Patrick Leon Nicholas, and placed him under arrest for the first-degree murder of Sarah Yarborough. He was 55 years old. He showed no reaction. He was transported to King County Jail and booked. Prosecutors requested bail be set at $5 million. The following morning, October 3rd, King County Sheriff Mitzi Johanknecht stood before reporters and cameras in Federal Way and announced the arrest. Laura Yarborough stood beside her. She thanked the detectives who had never given up, who had kept working even in the years when she herself had stopped believing an answer would ever come. The community of Federal Way had waited 28 years for this moment. When the announcement landed, it did not bring only relief. It brought shock, because Patrick Nicholas had been there the whole time, living in King County, riding buses past the school where Sarah had been found, and 4,000 tips from 4,000 people had never once pointed to him. A ghost hiding in plain sight, invisible inside a system that had already failed to stop him once before. When detectives searched Nicholas's property in Covington, Washington following his arrest, what they found told its own story. The building had no working electricity. Old newspapers and magazines were stacked across nearly every surface. The place was dark and cut off from the world, the home of a man who had lived on the edges of normal life for years. Two items stood out above everything else. The first was a newspaper from 1994, yellowed and old, carefully kept. On its front page was a story about the Sarah Yarborough murder investigation. Patrick Nicholas had held on to that newspaper for 25 years. It had been sitting in his home the entire time. The second item was found in a drawer in his kitchen. A photograph torn carefully from a magazine. A young woman in a cheerleading outfit, placed in the drawer alone. When prosecutors displayed that photograph inside the courtroom during the trial, the air left the room. 3.5 years passed between the arrest and the trial. On April 17, 2023, 31 years after Sarah Yarborough was found behind her high school, Patrick Leon Nicholas walked into the Malang Regional Justice Center in Kent, Washington, and took his seat at the defense table. He was 59 years old. He showed nothing. Behind the prosecution sat the people who had waited a lifetime for this day: Laura Yarborough, her son Andrew, Sarah's childhood friends, Drew Miller, the man who had found Sarah's body when he was just 13 years old and had carried that image into adulthood. The prosecution was led by King County Deputy Prosecuting Attorneys Celia Lee and Mary Barbosa. Their case rested on the DNA, irrefutable, overwhelming, and documented by the Washington State Patrol Crime Laboratory. Nicholas's DNA matched 13 out of 13 genetic markers tested from evidence on Sarah's clothing and drill team jacket. The probability of that evidence belonging to anyone other than Patrick Nicholas was 1 in 20 quadrillion. The DNA recovered from beneath Sarah's own fingernails, evidence she had torn from her killer as she fought for her life, was 590 billion times more likely to have come from Nicholas than from any unrelated person. Defense attorney David Montes challenged the science, calling forensic genetic genealogy untested. He argued that the rough skin the boys had described on the man's face did not match his client. Patrick Nicholas had no visible scarring or marks. The prosecution's answer was precise. Sarah's DNA had been found under her own fingernails. The rough, uneven texture Drew Miller and his friend had described may not have been acne scarring at all. It may have been fresh scratch marks, left by Sarah herself in the final moments of her life. Marks that were still raw and visible when the boys encountered Nicholas walking away from the bushes just minutes later. The trial lasted 9 days. The jury deliberated for a day and a half at the Malang Regional Justice Center in Kent. Not guilty on premeditated first-degree murder. Guilty on first-degree murder committed during the commission of an attempted assault. Guilty on second-degree murder committed with sexual motivation. Special finding: the crime was sexually motivated. The gallery broke. 32 years of grief came pouring out of the people who had loved Sarah Yarborough and refused to stop fighting for her. Drew Miller looked across the courtroom and made eye contact with a juror. The juror nodded, a small, quiet gesture that carried the weight of everything. "We heard you. We got it right." Patrick Nicholas sat at the defense table and showed nothing. 2 weeks after the verdict, on May 25, 2023, the Malang Regional Justice Center in Kent filled one final time. This was not about legal arguments. This was about saying out loud, in front of the man responsible, everything that had been held inside for 32 years. Laura Yarborough stood first. She called her daughter the delight of her life. She described the flowers Sarah planted every spring, the way she helped her brothers with their homework, the way she once told her mother she felt alive when she danced. Then, Laura described what had been taken. She said she and her husband had lost 3 years of their lives entirely, a blank where memory should have been. that their world went from full color to fuzzy gray. Andrew Yarborough, 11 years old when his sister was taken, a grown man standing in that courtroom now, told the court that Patrick Nicholas did not belong in free society and never had. Sarah's close friend Michelle Maddox described the aftermath inside Federal Way High School, how ill-equipped the school had been to handle the grief of losing Sarah, how some students had even blamed Sarah for what happened to her, and how once Nicholas was finally arrested decades later, she had been forced to grieve and re-grieve her best friend's murder all over again. Then Anne Croney stood up, the woman who had survived Patrick Nicholas by jumping into the Columbia River in Richland, Washington in 1983. The woman who had swum for her life. The woman whose testimony the judge had ruled could not be heard by the jury during the trial itself. When Anne rose from her seat inside the Maleng Regional Justice Center, Patrick Nicholas, who had shown zero emotion for 9 days of testimony, who had not moved a muscle through 2 guilty verdicts, visibly shuddered. He turned and looked at her. He recognized her face. After more than 40 years, he had never expected to see her again. Anne Croney stood at the podium and spoke clearly. She described the knife, the river, the swim that saved her life, and then she said the words that settled over that courtroom like a verdict of their own. She said the system had failed her. It had failed Sarah. It had failed Sarah's family, and it had failed countless others. She asked the court not to make the same mistake again. Judge Josephine Wiggs had listened to every word. She noted from the bench that Nicholas had been on parole for his earlier attempted rape when he murdered Sarah Yarborough, and that he had walked free for nearly 3 decades while the community of Federal Way suffered. When she spoke about what Sarah had endured in her final moments, fighting for her life on the grounds of her own school, she brought her fist down on the bench. Judge Wiggs sentenced Patrick Leon Nicholas to 548 months in prison, 45 years and 8 months, beyond the standard sentencing range made possible by the jury's finding of sexual motivation. At 59 years old, Patrick Nicholas will almost certainly die behind bars. He did not react to the sentence. He did not address the court. He said nothing. Sarah Yarborough's case now holds a permanent place in the history of forensic science. It was the first cold case ever to use consumer DNA databases to generate investigative leads, a method pioneered by Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick that has since helped crack cases across the country and given hundreds of other families answers they believed would never come. Anne Croney, who had believed for 36 years that justice had been served after Nicholas's 1983 conviction, said after the sentencing that it had never once occurred to her, in all those years, that what she had escaped from was a murderer. Laura Yarborough said she tries to give Patrick Nicholas as little space in her mind as possible. She does not say his name if she can help it. She thinks about Sarah instead, the flowers, the dancing, the smile that lit up every room she walked into. And Drew Miller, the boy who found Sarah's body at 13 years old and carried that image for the rest of his life, said something at the end of all of it that may be the most important thing anyone said throughout this entire case. He said knowing Nicholas was in prison mattered, but knowing Sarah's family and friends, truly knowing them, was what had given him the actual healing he needed. After 32 years, it was not the punishment alone that healed the wound. It was the connection, the love, the people who had refused to let Sarah Yarborough be forgotten. She lived by 2 words. Every day of her 16 years she meant every syllable. Carpe diem, seize the day. And on May 25, 2023, inside a courtroom in Kent, Washington, 32 years after someone stole the rest of her days, the people who loved Sarah Yarborough walked out into the light and seized every single one of them back. Carpe diem, Sarah. The day was finally seized. Now we want to hear from you. Do you believe Washington state should change its law to allow familial DNA searches, the kind that could have identified Patrick Nicholas 14 years before he was actually caught? When Nicholas asked detectives what year this happened, do you believe Sarah Yarborough was truly his only victim? And do you think a system that releases a convicted violent offender after 3.5 years of a 10-year sentence can ever truly be called just? Leave your answer in the comments. Share this story because Sarah's name deserves to be heard. Like the video so more people find it. And subscribe to Crime Vault Files. We will see you in the next vault.